really excited just to pick your brain because it's very rare that I get to talk about the business side. I'm always talking about the craft of TV writing and screenwriting. So this is very exciting. Yeah, so just to jump into it, I know your team had come to me to talk about backwards engineering IP, and that was the first time I had ever heard of that term. So in broad terms, what is that?
I think it's just because we live in such a multifaceted content ecosystem now, right? Like there isn't sort of everyone wants to make a movie, and how do you do that? It's sort of like everybody is interested in stories and digesting and consuming stories in all different ways. And so our experience around intellectual property is not about sort of a linear exploitation, but how do we look at a piece of intellectual property and deliver it to a way that it should be consumed that's appropriate for what it is, and also respect the fact that it could be multifaceted, right? Like we live in a space where someone can be producing a doc series and suddenly, that will leverage into a scripted series, and that could leverage into, ancillary rights and things like that. And who knows with interactive and video game. And so it really has kind of shifted how we think about intellectual property rights, and what one can do with it, and to make sure that in deal making you're not limiting in your approach about the asset that is your IP. And for writers, it's their script, right? Like,
Right.
Yes, there is a page 1 to 90, and that's a script, but like, what is it? Like, what else could it be? And so we try to approach intellectual property in that way.
So when you're working, because I know you work with a lot of production companies as well, but going into the granular of someone like, a screenwriter or even a TV writer, are you looking like at the broad picture of like, hey, this can be more than just this standalone thing. This can be a graphic novel. This could be a narrative podcast, are you guys trying to help them expand and step out of that box?
Yeah, I think when you're the rights holder and you're engaging with a financier, whether it's a studio streamer or a traditional financier, they want everything and you want to hold on as much as you can.
Right.
So the strategy is to figure out what is the sort of like organic opportunity points in relation to your IP, right? So if you're making something that has a lot of intrinsic value and cult following, and maybe it's more genre specific, and something like an NFT could have longevity, right? Like maybe that's the thing you hold on to, versus if you're in a Christmas movie standpoint, the idea of remaining involved and attached on sequels and prequels is maybe more relevant. So it's a little bit about being forward thinking about where the full potential is on your content and what your content is. If you're making one of those dramas that ends up at Sundance that everybody loves, like, I don't really know that it's worth an attorney and you dying on the vine for NFT rights. Like, I don't really know how meaningful that is, but again, you kind of never know. But it's also about, in the efficiency of deal making and the reality of it, understanding where the value lies, right? So that's kind of where you as the rights holder need to think about, like, where do you really see the full potential of this? And then who on the other side is acquiring it? What are they willing to give up? What are they willing to share? And what are they trying to make right now?
Right. It's a lot to chew on. And I'm curious, you have a pretty big team now. Where do you guys come into play when either representing an IP or the filmmaker production company? And, if they're interested in acquiring an IP, and what is that approach for you guys?
I would say from the point of view of the one acquiring it, we come on very early on, right? Generally, the production company or studio may identify what is the right and whether or not it's available, right? And that's the extent of it. And then we take a very sort of strategic approach of what is it about this right that you want to do? And you sort of, it becomes like a flow chart, right? Or are you going to spend money on development? Are you really just shopping something that's completed? Do you need like a formal full-on option purchase and get into all of it because you are the one that's going to self-finance? Do you really have no money and don't want to spend legal fees? Do you really just want to do something more truncated? Do you feel like you are, as the production company or studio, are going to be sort of seismically changing the development of what this is? Is there a kernel of idea and are you really building on it? So we kind of ask all those questions, and from that really understand what is the proposal or offer to the rights holder. On the flip side, for the rights holder, particularly writers can tend to be neurotic, right? And they really want to understand everything, and like, but to some extent, like, it's a little bit traditional or old school in the sense that, like, as the rights holder, you have to be on the receiving end of an offer. it's very odd and counterintuitive to be saying like, I'm the screenplay, you have interest in my screenplay, here's what I want. That's just like not how it goes. And so oftentimes what I'm doing with rights holders, whether it's an author or somebody with life rights or somebody that wrote a script, is like telling them to just for a second receive and listen to what the message is on the offer, right? If it's like a wildly depressing lowball thing, right? It's not that there isn't a counter to make, but it's like it gives you the understanding of the landscape of where you're coming from. And if it's something that is actually pretty market and respectable, and that's their initial offer, then you kind of roll up your sleeves and you can play with it. So that is like the hardest challenge with IP rights holders is they will get in the courtship with the production company or studio, and they get really excited and they feel like they have all these feelings and they're talking about all this development. It's like, okay, but how do they relate to you? Like, what are they offering? And I find that gray area often causes the most loss of leverage for the rights holder or the writer, and the most leverage for the production company, because they're courting you, they're getting the milk for free, and at the point at which they put in the offer, they sort of have a sense of your desperation, and it's really not great. Yeah,
right. Yeah, you got to play that poker face. It's hard for writers, like you said. We're just so
it is
that just you want all the details, but you're so excited because it's so rare. And just for you as an entertainment lawyer, a fun one, and I think a lot of writers, or even filmmakers, are just kind of like lost in the weeds of like, what is the difference between an agent and an entertainment lawyer? Because I feel like you guys kind of do a lot of the same, and I see a lot of crossover with lawyers becoming agents and vice versa. And then what is the benefit to having someone like you in their back pocket, essentially?
I think that there's definitely transferable skills between agents and, by the way, managers too, and lawyers, right? Like, we're all not capable of writing a good script. We're capable of making good deals, right? Like, so there's a little bit of that. And I think that it depends on what the writer's objectives are and where they are in their career too. The cachet of being with one of those branded agencies, which is now dwindled down to like one hand, which is crazy, is going to afford opportunity and procurement and sort of opportunity points that, like, an entertainment lawyer, that's not what they do, right? They're not out there hustling and making introductions and sort of like really able to evaluate this offer versus this offer on the landscape of what that company is, right? So there is a lot of value to agents, and I find that when I'm representing a writer and I'm on that team, the agent and I complement each other, and while there is some overlap, it's really just sort of a united front to do the best representation possible. The thing about lawyers that's probably most intrinsically important for writers is you have an asset, and you're taking your asset to market, right? It's like selling a house, and the way in which you sell and the way in which the rights may or may not revert and the nuances around all of that are pretty complex. And to my earlier point, because of the multitude of ways that your IP can go, if you're not sort of contemplating every nook and cranny, you may lose something on the table that you just lose just by virtue of the fact that you didn't ask for it or you didn't ask for it properly. And agents are doing a lot of deals at all the same time, and like they're a little bit more superficial in a nice way of getting that deal done, but they can't be expected to be like really dissecting the intricacy of your reversion paragraph, right? They really can't be expected to understand and to push on it. They understand, but they don't necessarily can't get in the nuance. So your entertainment attorney is really going to make sure that the asset that you're taking to market, you're selling in the right way, and that the prenup mechanisms are in there where you're not going to have remorse, because that script is only one script, right? And once you give it away in a certain way, you've encumbered it or set it up in a way where like you can't claw it back unless you've really kind of engineered it correctly.
Right. And I've heard, deals go sideways where even through an option process where a company has it for 10 months and they can't do anything and they're not moving it, but it's the pressures on the writer to do something. It's like, but I hired essentially you to do this for me. And it's really that blurred line of, what writers should be asking for during these negotiations. And so, yeah, what should a writer just be aware of when they're going into these deals or just looking at a contract? Like, what should they just be looking for just in protecting themselves?
Well, I think the first thing a writer should understand is that, like, the contract is only as good as the person you're contracting with, right? So if somebody has a terrible reputation and they're an awful producer that people say awful things about and are like mired in litigation, you could have the best attorney in the world, but you're still doing a deal with the devil, so to speak, right? So like, I always forewarn clients that I will do the best job I can, but there are just some opposing sides where like you just have to expect the worst because they're known for the worst, right? And then there's also the concession of like, there are things that you can ask for and get when you're dealing with an up and coming indie production company that really sees the value in this and maybe that themselves are emerging versus like Disney is Disney, right? And like you're only going to get away with so much. So it's a little bit about understanding what's on the other side so that you can have a perspective that is fair to what you're dealing with. And then I think it's like a laundry list of, first of all, the writer being self-aware of what they care about, right? Like, is it of utmost importance that you're the one that controls every iteration of the draft? And will it be, will you want to jump off the building if they have the right to bring on another writer during the option term? And is that going to be a fundamental issue for you? Well, if it is, like, those are things you need to convey to your team because it's not necessarily important for everyone, but it may be important for you. And then it's like, ideally you have a team, an agent or a lawyer that guides you through this to kind of figure it out. But, the kind of like top of mind things are when you're doing a shopping agreement, you want to make sure that you have a term that holds them accountable and it's not open-ended. You want to make sure that if the term does not result in a deal, whatever happened during that term, you own it, it reverts free and clear, and you're not sort of like somehow agreeing that what you did during the term is a work for hire, or that the producer has rights they shouldn't when really they're shopping it around. And then in a shopping agreement, the ideal is like you just have direct visibility and direct privity to negotiate your deal with whoever they set it up with. Like that's the ideal, and making sure that that person who's shopping it isn't asking for like $1 million in a pony or something insane that's just going to make it like prohibitive. So those are like kind of the shopping things, and there's nuances, and you need like a full legal consultation to go through it. And on the option side, it's like, how much are you getting paid for how long, right? Like there's an option fee. I think for emerging writers, if you're non-WGA, using the WGA as a benchmark and a standard is always good, because at least just shows you what like everybody else that's union is at least getting this. So like if you're getting less than that, just be mindful of it. And then understanding like what happens during development. Are you giving up control of your baby? Can somebody else develop it? What on exercise, what are they paying you? And what rights are you giving up? What are you holding on to? Are there passives? Are there things about this property that are of relevance to you and importance to you? And then the other thing that gets much more complex in an option purchase is like you're making a batch of representation and warranties about this, and you're indemnifying the production company from it. So if you and your friend Bob sat in a coffee shop for 2 years and worked on the script, and you and Bob don't have a written agreement, and you as the writer are now entering into this deal with Disney, and Bob comes out of the woodworks, you have a personal liability and exposure that's pretty significant. So those are sometimes things that writers don't necessarily think about, and good legal counsel will help guide you through to be thoughtful of it, because those are the things that like make it all not worth it, when those things arise.
Yeah, totally. And that totally segues into my next question, just, in that protection, copyright versus WGA registration and going to arbitration and all that, what steps should a writer take on top of, having a formal written agreement with a writing partner to just protect themselves and each other?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you'll want formal written agreements in place with people that touch your intellectual property. It's like that is infringing on your intellectual property and rights. And so if somebody really meddles and works on your script and you don't have a written agreement in place, under copyright law, they're a joint author. And that's problematic, right? Because then you basically have taken them along for the ride forever. Copyright registrations can be done online. They're fairly inexpensive. They are necessary if you're going to pursue a copyright infringement claim. They also put others on notice. So when we do an option for a studio, we'll register the option. So that's in the Copyright Office. But you as a screenwriter also, if you ever have an access claim or a real infringement issue, to have the documentation with the Copyright Office that you registered this zombie apocalypse script in 1995, it's relevant, right? Because you can pull that up and show it. WGA database doesn't necessarily give you the keys to pursue copyright infringement, but it is relevant in terms of WGA credit determination. So whether you do both, I sort of depends on the writer and like what their concerns are. I think you definitely should do the copyright registration as and when you're navigating through real transitional changes around your script. So you just have that documented.
Yeah. How soon should a writer look into getting their work copyrighted? Like first draft or polished draft, or when they're going into trying to sell it or even enter contests? What is the great or best practice around that?
I would say like somewhere in between when it's done and definitely before when anybody else sees it. So if you
Mm,
submit it to a contest, if you are submitting it to a manager as a writing sample in any way, shape, or form where it's out in the universe, you should register it before.
love that tip. Okay, I want to take a step back and I want to talk about you. Um, you've been in this industry for a while and you've been doing some really cool things, but I'm so curious about like what piqued your interest in wanting to become an entertainment lawyer.
Well, when I graduated from law school, I thought I wanted to do politics or entertainment. And like I happened to live close to LA, and I just really gravitated towards the idea of movie making and filmmaking and just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. Obviously, when you go to law school, they highly discourage you from doing entertainment law because it's so competitive. And I didn't have
Yeah.
any nepotism helping me. So it kind of was just, I felt like producers really resonated with me because I grew up in a family business. I really understand entrepreneurship. And so like producers really just like start a business, make a movie, start a business, right? Like, and that
Hmm.
really, I understood that even though I didn't know how to make anything. And so I printed out cards at Kinko's and like really just tried to be an entertainment lawyer, but it kind of worked out because when I started in 2005, it literally was the summer where you could make a movie on digital instead of 35 millimeter.
Hmm.
And the one relevant thing about that is like you could literally make a movie for like 50 grand, which you could never have done before because the cost of 35 millimeter alone was like 250 or 500,000. Like it would just would be so, and it took longer, right? Because
Right.
35 millimeter was like a whole process. So I just happened, I think, to be a little bit at the right place at the right time when I didn't have anyone giving me a big job at a big firm. Nobody really thought anyone should just be doing entertainment law, but it just so happened like all these little movies needed a lawyer, even if they didn't really know what they were doing. So it kind of worked out, like it just was in the right zeitgeist. And that kind of like entrepreneurial approach to entertainment law has really served me as the industry has changed 100 times over the past 17 years. Like when WGA had a strike in 2008, I was like, I feel like unscripted is going to be a thing. And it has become a huge part of our
Yeah.
practice. But it just was sort of like I feel like it's not just the Kardashians. There's like elevated auteurs and unscripted content. And like we did Chef's Table when it was the first unscripted show on Netflix. Like that's how long ago like that was all starting. So it's definitely like my origination story has really lent and like maintained and how we approach, how we think about what we do and who we serve at the firm.
Yeah, I love how you just kind of carved your own pathway into where you are now and what you're continuing to do. And for those who aren't aware, that you're a huge advocate of lifting others who don't have, access or just have those resources, especially young female attorneys. I want to say it's called PEFA, PEFA. That's
Yeah,
your
PEFA,
organization,
PEFA,
PEFA.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which you established in 2005, and also congrats, you got your nonprofit organization this year. But yeah, can you tell just the kind of programs and mentoring that you guys are offering through this organization?
Yeah, yeah. We started it really just as a networking group because when I first started 15 years ago, they'd be like, "You're a girl, she's a girl, you guys should meet." And I was like, "There's got to be a better way to organize this."
Right.
And it wasn't. It was more of a novelty back then. Now it's not. But basically, particularly with all of the movement in the past 5 years and just the sort of awareness of diversity and inclusion, I strongly believe that underrepresented voices and talent need representation also by diverse and inclusive voices and that kind of representation. And so for us, formally becoming a 501c3 and really elevating women who are underprivileged or have struggled or are not necessarily coming from the easiest walking into the industry, similar to my situation, like I want them to feel like they have opportunities and advocacy. So this year we gave out our first grant to a wonderful woman, Keisha, who, is a single mother, went through law school, is an amazing woman, is going to be a huge advocate for whoever she represents down the road. And like, we're thrilled to be a part of her journey. And we are just launching a mommy mentorship program because I feel like another sort of struggle is women feel like they're going to be taken out of rotation because they're procreating, which is insane. But like,
Right.
I do think that there's mentorship and sort of support around women that have been there in the industry and do that and understand how to navigate through that and not feel like it's a negative impact. And so we're
Right.
doing that. And in the spring, we'll be doing sort of new grad mentorship. But part of it is like, we want women and underrepresented voices to feel like they're going to have a batch of representation that understands what they've been through and can really advocate for them. And, I take that part very seriously to what I do. I feel like a lot of women that are my mentors or in my older age group really looked out for me. One particular instance, I had a very high level entertainment attorney was on a conference call with me, and there was somebody who was like not being great, and she was opposing, and she picked up the phone and said, like, do not let somebody talk to you like that. It's totally
Mhm.
inappropriate. Like, that is not how someone should be. And like, I really, it is those small things of just like calling each other out and making sure you feel like you're supported in a community that wants there to be content by all, right? And so for me, my impact is, I know lawyers, and so like, that's a way for us to really kind of advocate for women that are and people that identify as women to graduate and really take a view of really helping out underrepresented voices in this world.
I love that. That's so cool that you're doing that, and just I hope that just keeps going and going and going and grows, and other people start taking note and doing their own thing too. Couple more questions for you before I let you go, but you know, I sense we're kind of entering this new renaissance of in terms of content and creators and where we're finding content and those creators, kind of similar to that Deadline article of TikTok users being going through like an incubator through NBC, I believe. And it's just so interesting to see like how we're kind of evolving and kind of stepping out of the box. But especially with the pandemic, I think it shifted a lot of how we're consuming and creating content. For you, have you seen a huge dramatic shift in the last 3 years and how your own clients are approaching creating content and what they're going after or trying to create?
Yeah, I mean, I think influencer culture is not a trend, it's a thing, right? And I think
Hmm.
that discovery, you know, 15 years ago, discovery was about finding a short film at Sundance, and that led to a director auteur that would then do a feature, right? And I think nowadays you have to kind of take a much broader lens about where talent and art and views are being expressed. Um, TikTok is, some people roll their eyes, but I've had conversations with clients and studios, and like, if you don't understand the relevance of how that content is not just being created, but consumed by
Hmm.
anyone under the age of 35, you're sort of missing the mark, right? It's sort of like when Napster came out, people were like, oh, no one's going to listen to music on digital. It's like, well, no, they are. Like, this is how people that are in the middle of nowhere making a view are going to be heard, and how we as an industry convert those statements and those points of views is really the elevating factor. And so it's definitely, it's a little bit about, and I think there's a push pull, right? Because I think that
Hmm.
there are people that are maybe under 50 that are a little bit more receptive to it, and then people that are much more elevated in the industry that don't quite get it. And it's just that right now there's a big push pull of accepting it not to just be something transient, but sort of being to where it's evolving.
Right.
And definitely my clients are mindful that, it's, you have to kind of look for talent outside of the scope of a traditional film festival. It's just not that simple anymore. And so there's definitely a receptivity to it. I don't know that people have fully figured it out.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, my first reaction to when I saw that was like, oh my God, all the years I've studied craft out the window because I don't get TikTok at all. I'm definitely in that age group of like, I don't know how to use my phone barely. So it's interesting, but I'm excited to see what these new voices are going to do and how that shapes again or reshapes our content, especially on things like, what you're doing with like the unscripted and all of that and what they're going to do there. Last
But
question for
even
you.
like from
Yeah,
where you're sitting, just to be
yeah,
fair, right? Like,
yeah.
you're this like highly trained, amazing writer. But the reality is that like that show that you're going to win the Emmy on, the reality, the world that we live in now, that could originate off of some silly viral influencer like 6 episode thing at TikTok. And
Mhm.
what it's not like one is obliterating the other. It's like your craft and your ability to execute it's just the nucleus of where that's going to come from, maybe your TikTok influencer that you don't quite get, and that's the beauty of it. It's like writers still got to write, directors still got to direct, actors still got to act, but it's like where the inspiration and where the stories come from, that's shifting. And I feel like people need to understand it's not one or the other, it's all, which is great.
Yeah. And we saw that with YouTube, but so many great voices that came through YouTube that are just now basically running our industry, which is great. We need more of that. It's a really interesting time to be alive in Hollywood, especially. Last question for you, just a general piece of advice for content creators, producers, writers, authors, podcasters, all of it. What should they think more about in terms of the business side of things when they're getting into negotiations or just sitting down to write something, because it is, a business after all. And I think a lot of writers especially don't think about that next step. What is something that you just hope they would just kind of think about in the long term to, best serve them down the road?
It's a big ask, right? So, but in the universe of the big ask, I would say that you can't as a writer be expected to know everything about the business. Like you can't even as a lawyer be expected to know everything about the business. But I do think it's really important that you're self-aware and know who you are and what your voice is, and be in touch with where your voice fits into this world, right? This entertainment industry. And understand where opportunity points are shifting and changing, right? Like you may not need to know everything about the industry, but if you are a diehard writer of 30-minute sitcoms, you better understand who's buying and paying for those, and which production companies are making those, and which studios are into those, and which talent is gravitating to those, and who in your world and space and in this like working system are actually going to be your aspirational partners, right? And I think that's a thing that sometimes it feels overwhelming and like, oh, I am a writer, I don't know about all this. And that's fair. But like you also need to be in touch with how you fit into it and what you need to know about it, so that when those opportunities arise, right? Like if you get a call from a production company that isn't really doing that kind of thing, doesn't really resonate with your taste and your abilities, like maybe that's not an ideal partner for you, because you're in touch to know who you want to be in business with and who you want to do things with. And I think that part of it of like, don't know everything, but know how you relate to it is really important.
Yeah. Do your homework, which is
which
you can do
and
now.
know who you are in relation to it, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe you're not going to be the Marvel popcorn munching screenwriter. That's cool. But if you're the drama writer, like you better be going to those festivals and meeting those people and like putting yourself out there in that way and like thinking about your stories in that trajectory, or else you're just kind of like putting your head in the sand.
Right. Which a lot of writers do, because there are a lot of introverts, but get out there and do it. No, this was so great and such a great conversation, and so many great things to chew on for writers and all, filmmakers, creators. This is awesome. So thank you so much for your time, Elsa. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.